A newlywed bride returned home after her honeymoon. Her best friend, curious and excited, asked, "So, where did you go for your honeymoon?" The bride blushed and said, "New York, Miami, and Las Vegas." Her friend, amazed, asked, "Wow, what all did you see there?" The bride sighed and replied, "The ceiling and the fan." While playing in the backyard, little Johnny kills a honeybee. His father sees him killing the honeybee and angrily says, "No honey for you for 1 month." Later that afternoon, Johnny's dad catches him tearing the wings off a butterfly. "That's it. No butter for you for 1 month," says his dad. Later that evening, as Johnny's mother cooks dinner, a cockroach runs across the kitchen floor. She jumps and stomps on it, and then looks up to find little Johnny and her husband watching her. Little Johnny looks at his father and says, "Are you going to tell her, Dad, or do you want me to?" A chemist walks into his shop to find a man leaning against the wall. "What's wrong with him?" he asks his assistant. "He came in for some cough syrup," the assistant explains, "but I couldn't find any, so I sold him a bottle of laxatives instead." "What?" the chemist says, horrified. "You can't treat a cough with laxatives." "Of course you can," the assistant declares. "Look at him. He's far too scared to cough." While munching on a pickle at the counter, a 3-year-old held out her hand and said, "Look, Mommy, I killed a fly." Horrified, her mom grabbed her hands and scrubbed them thoroughly with soap. Once the girl was back at the table, the mom asked, amazed, "How did you kill a fly all by yourself?" Between bites, the girl proudly replied, "I hit it with my pickle." Bob rings a call center and complaining about his internet. "Bob, my internet is not working properly." To officer, "Okay, double-click on my computer." Bob, "I can't see your computer." Officer, No, click on my computer on your computer." Bob, "How can I click on your computer from my computer?" Officer, "Listen, there is an icon labeled My Computer on your computer. Okay, double-click on it." Bob, "What is this? What is your computer doing on my computer?" Officer, "Double-click on your computer." Bob, "On which icon I've to click?" Officer, "My computer." Bob, "Oh, you fool. Tell me where is your office. I'll come there and click on your computer." A lion woke up feeling bold and full of himself. Spotting a small monkey, he roared, "Who's the king of the jungle?" The nervous monkey replied, "You are, mighty lion." Feeling unstoppable, the lion marched up to an ox and growled, "Who's the king of the jungle?" The trembling ox answered, "You are, O great lion." Puffed up with pride, the lion approached an elephant and demanded, "Who's the king of the jungle?" The elephant calmly picked him up with his trunk, gently set him aside, and walked away without a word. Bruised but not beaten, the lion muttered, "No need to get so touchy. I was just asking." At the bus stop, 6-year-old Johnny stands beside his mum as they wait. She leans down and whispers, "I'll buy a ticket for myself, but if the driver asks how old you are, say you're 5. That way, I won't have to pay for you." The bus arrives and they climb aboard. Mum purchases an adult return ticket to the town center. The driver, glancing at Johnny, smiles and asks, "And what's your name, young man?" Johnny beams, "I'm Johnny." The driver nods. "And how old are you, Johnny?" "I'm 5, Johnny replies confidently. The driver chuckles and follows up, "And when will you be 6? Johnny grins wide. "As soon as I get off the bus." 3 men were sitting together, sharing stories about their hardships. They had just met at a support group and decided to open up about their struggles. First man. The first guy sighed deeply and said, I've been living in the jungles of Africa for 3 years. Every day's a battle for survival. Snakes, lions, and no proper food. The second man chimed in, shaking his head. That's nothing. I've spent 5 years wandering the scorching deserts of Arabia. No water, no shade, just endless sand. It's brutal. Third man, tearing up. The third man, with a distant look in his eyes, whispered, I've been living with my wife for 20 years. An 83-year-old woman aced her annual checkup. Doctor, you're in fantastic shape for your age. But just to confirm, do you still have intercourse? Woman, hold on. Let me double-check with my husband. She shuffles to the waiting room, where her husband's flipping through a magazine. Woman, Jake, quick question. Do we still have intercourse? Jake, slamming down the magazine. For the love of, how many times do I have to say it? We've got Blue Cross. It's on the fridge, the calendar, the dog's collar. Blue Cross. Somewhere an insurance agent is cackling. A wealthy Texan checked into a hotel and after settling in, went down to the front desk. Leaning in, he asked the clerk in a low voice, Where can a man find some company around here? The clerk smirked. Give me a moment, sir. I'll send someone up to your room. Feeling good, the Texan went back upstairs to wait. 30 minutes later, there was a knock. He opened the door to find a moderately attractive redhead smiling at him. The front desk said you were looking for a little company, she said, stepping inside. The Texan grinned. That's right. I'll give you $250 if you spend the night with me the way we do down in Texas. She raised an eyebrow. Depends on what you mean. Different things cost different prices. The Texan waved her off. I'll give you $500 if you just go along with how we do it in Texas. She hesitated. All right, $1,000, no questions asked. Still unsure, she bit her lip. The Texan leaned in. Tell you what, I'll make it $5,000, just 30 minutes, Texas style. At that, she finally agreed. They got to business, and to her surprise, it was just regular, simple fun. Nothing fancy. After 20 minutes, the Texan finished and rolled over, looking mighty pleased with himself. The woman, still confused, turned to him. So, what exactly is Texas style? The Texan chuckled, grabbed his hat and winked. On credit, baby. On credit. One day, a professor was talking about marriage in the class. Professor, what kind of wife would you like, Bob? Bob, I would want a wife like the moon. Professor, wow, what a choice. So you want her to be cool and calm like the moon? Bob, no. Professor, oh, so you want her to be round and white? Bob, no. Professor, oh, so you want her to be fair and beautiful like the moon? Bob, no, I want her to be exactly like the moon. Just arrive at night and disappear in the morning. Professor fainted. On hearing that her elderly grandfather had just passed away, Katie went straight to her grandparents' house to visit her 95-year-old grandmother and comfort her. When she asked how her grandfather had died, her grandmother replied, "He had a heart attack while we were making love on Sunday morning." Horrified, Katie told her grandmother that two people nearly 100 years old having sex would surely be asking for trouble. "Oh no, my dear," replied Granny. "Many years ago, realizing our advanced age, we figured out the best time to do it was when the church bells would start to ring. It was just the right rhythm, nice and slow and even. Nothing too strenuous, simply in on the ding and out on the dong." She paused, wiped away a tear, and then continued, "And if that damned ice cream truck hadn't come along, he'd still be alive today." A fly was buzzing around a barn one day when she stumbled upon a fresh pile of cow manure. Hungry from not having eaten in hours, she eagerly dove in and began feasting. She ate and ate until she was completely stuffed. Feeling satisfied, the fly decided it was time to leave. But when she tried to take off, she discovered she had overindulged and couldn't get off the ground. Looking around for a solution, she noticed a pitchfork leaning against the wall. Determined, she climbed to the top of the handle and leapt off, hoping the momentum would help her fly. Sadly, she was mistaken. The poor fly plummeted to the ground and met her untimely end. When I went to lunch today, I noticed an old man sitting on a park bench sobbing his eyes out. I stopped and asked him what was wrong. He said, "I have a 22-year-old wife at home. She rubs my back every morning and then gets up and makes me pancakes, sausage, fresh fruit, and freshly ground coffee." I said, "Well, then why are you crying?" He said, "She makes me homemade soup for lunch and my favorite brownies, cleans the house, and then watches sports TV with me for the rest of the afternoon." I said, "Well, why are you crying?" He said, "For dinner, she makes me a gourmet meal with wine and my favorite dessert, and then makes love with me until the wee hours." I said, "Well, why in the world would you be crying?" He said, "I can't remember where I live." The visiting church school supervisor asks little Johnny during Bible class, "Who broke down the walls of Jericho?" Little Johnny responds, "I don't know, but it definitely wasn't me." Shocked by this lack of basic Bible knowledge, the supervisor rushes to the principal and shares the whole incident. The principal, calm as ever, replies, "I know little Johnny and his whole family well. If Johnny says he didn't do it, then I trust him. That's the truth, as far as I'm concerned." Still baffled, the supervisor goes to the regional head of education and recounts the whole story. After listening, the regional head calmly says, "I don't see why you're making such a big deal out of this. Just get 3 quotes and get the darn wall fixed." A young couple invited their elderly pastor over for Sunday dinner. While the couple was busy in the kitchen preparing the meal, the pastor struck up a conversation with their young son. "What are we having for dinner?" the pastor asked curiously. "Goat," the boy replied confidently. "Goat?" said the startled pastor. "Are you sure about that?" "Yep," the boy nodded. On the way home from church, I heard Mom say to Dad, "Don't forget, we're having the old goat for dinner tonight." A cop pulls over a Harley speeding down the highway and approaches the biker. "What's your name?" the officer asks. "Fred," the biker replies. "Fred what?" "Just Fred," the biker says with a shrug. The officer, in a good mood, considers letting him off with a warning, but his curiosity gets the better of him. "Come on now, Fred. Everybody's got a last name." Fred sighs. "I used to. But I lost it." Now the cop's intrigued. "All right, I'll bite. How'd you lose your last name?" Fred leans in. "It's a long story, so stay with me. I was born Fred Johnson. Worked hard in school, got good grades, decided to become a doctor, made it through college, med school, residency, the whole thing. Earned my degree, so I became Fred Johnson, Maryland. After a while, I got bored being a doctor, so I went back to school and became a dentist. Got my degree, and now I was Fred Johnson, Maryland, DDS. But then, well, I started fooling around with my assistant. She gave me VD. So now I was Fred Johnson, Maryland, DDS, with VD. The American Dental Association found out about the VD, so they took away my DDS. Now I was just Fred Johnson, Maryland, with VD. Then the AMA heard about the ADA taking away my DDS because of the VD, so they took away my MD. Now I was just Fred Johnson with VD. And then the VD took away my Johnson. So now I'm just Fred. The cop walked back to his patrol car, wiping away tears of laughter. Elsie, an elderly lady, was patiently waiting to park in a spot when a young man in his brand new red BMW zipped around her and claimed the space she had been eyeing. Fuming, Elsie approached the young fellow and, with a forced smile, said, "I was about to park there." The young man, barely glancing at her, replied with a smirk, That's what you get to do when you're young and sharp." Infuriated, Elsie climbed back into her car, shifted it into reverse, and without hesitation stomped on the accelerator, ramming straight into his shiny BMW. The young man rushed back, eyes wide, and shouted, "What on earth did you do that for?" Elsie, now with a satisfied grin, looked him in the eye and said, "That's what you can do when you're old and rich." Papu is 33 years old and still single. One day, a friend asked, "Why aren't you married? Can't you find a woman who will be a good wife?" Papu replied, "Actually, I've found many women I wanted to marry. But when I bring them home to meet my parents, my mother doesn't like them." His friend thinks for a moment and says, "I've got the perfect solution. Just find a girl who's just like your mother." A few months later, they meet again, and his friend says, "Did you find the perfect girl? Did your mother like her?" With a frown on his face, Papu answers, "Yes, I found the perfect girl. She was just like my mother." "You were right, my mother liked her very much." The friend said, "Then what's the problem?" Papu replied, "Now my father doesn't like her." The pastor and his wife were a beloved part of the small-town congregation, always bringing warmth and faith to the community. One Sunday morning, the pastor stood before the church members with a sheepish smile. "Brothers and sisters," he began, clearing his throat, "my wife and I are thrilled to announce that we are expecting another child. That'll make it 7. A ripple of murmurs swept through the pews. The congregation appreciated their pastor's expanding family, but couldn't ignore the strain his growing salary was putting on the church budget. After the service, a meeting was called in the fellowship hall. The atmosphere was tense, with members debating how to handle the situation. "We love the pastor, but we're running out of funds," said Mr. Johnson, the church treasurer. "It's not right to limit God's blessings," added Mrs. Parker, fanning herself dramatically. The voices grew louder and more divided until the pastor himself walked in, a calm smile on his face. "Friends," he said, raising his hand for silence, "I've heard your concerns, and I understand. Children are indeed blessings from above, and I'll gladly welcome as many as the Lord sends our way. However, I've come up with a new plan to ease the burden on our church." The congregation leaned forward, eager to hear his solution. "Starting today, for every additional child we have, I'll take on a new responsibility to serve this community. Whether it's mending fences, tutoring kids after school, or even joining the church choir, I'll work to ensure that each blessing comes with a blessing in return." The room burst into applause. The idea was ingenious, and it reflected the pastor's deep commitment to his flock. But then, from the back of the hall, old Mrs. Thompson, known for her sharp wit, stood up. Her voice, though frail, carried a playful tone. "Pastor," she said with a twinkle in her eye, "that's a fine plan. But if you're taking on all this extra work, maybe you ought to have a second talk with the Lord about quality and quantity." The room erupted in laughter, and even the pastor couldn't help but chuckle. From that day forward, the pastor's family continued to grow, but so did the unity of the congregation. And as the years passed, every new child was not only a blessing, but a reminder of the creative solutions and humor that kept their little church thriving. A professor found himself seated next to a farmer on a train. Feeling bored, the professor decided to suggest a game to make the ride more entertaining. "I'll ask you a question," the professor said. "If you don't know the answer, you give me $5. Then you ask me a question. And if I don't know the answer, I'll give you $500. Sound good?" The farmer nodded in agreement. The professor started confidently. "What's the distance between the Earth and the Moon?" The farmer thought for a moment, then quietly pulled out $5 and handed it over. Now it was the farmer's turn. He asked, "What animal has 3 legs when climbing a mountain and 4 legs when coming down?" The professor was puzzled. He pondered the question, flipped through his notebook, and tried every logical explanation he could think of, but he was stumped. Finally, he sighed, pulled out $500 and handed it to the farmer. The farmer accepted the money with a smile and leaned back to take a nap. Still curious and unable to let it go, the professor shook the farmer awake. "Wait, what's the answer?" he asked. Without a word, the farmer pulled out $5, handed it to the professor, and went back to sleep. Tommy is a young boy, just potty trained. When he goes to the bathroom, though, Tommy manages to hit everything but the toilet. So his mom has to go in and clean up after him. After 2 weeks, she has had enough and takes Tommy to see the doctor. After the examination, the doctor said, his unit is too small. An old wives' tale is to give him 2 slices of toast each morning, and his unit will grow so he can hold it and aim straight. The next morning, Tommy jumped out of bed and ran downstairs to the kitchen. There on the table are 12 slices of toast. "Mom," Tommy yells, "the doctor said I only had to eat 2 slices of toast." "I know," said his mother. "The other 10 are for your father." A beautiful young woman is about to undergo a minor operation. She's laid on a hospital trolley bed with nothing on, except a sheet over her. The nurse pushes the trolley down the corridor towards the operating theater, where she leaves the girl on the trolley outside while she goes in to check whether everything is ready. A young man wearing a white coat approaches, lifts the sheet up and starts examining her body. He puts the sheet back and then walks away and talks to another man in a white coat. The second man comes over, lifts the sheet, and does the same examinations. When a third man does the same thing, but more closely, she grows impatient and says, "All these examinations are fine and appreciated, but when are you going to start the operation?" The man in the white coat shrugged his shoulders. "I have no idea. We're just painting the corridor." Why do we have to put in our 2 cents, but only get a penny for our thoughts? Who's pocketing that extra penny? If you make it to heaven, are you stuck wearing the outfit you were buried in for eternity? Why does a round pizza come in a square box? Efficiency, or just to mess with us? What exactly was wrong with ham before they cured it? How did we put a man on the moon before we figured out putting wheels on luggage was a good idea? Why do people say they slept like a baby when babies wake up crying every 2 hours? If a deaf person goes to court, is it still called a hearing? Why do we pay to go up skyscrapers, only to use binoculars to look back down at the ground? Doctors leave the room while you change, but then come back to see you naked anyway. What's the point? Why do toasters have a setting that burns toast beyond recognition? Who is eating that? If Jimmy cracks corn and no one cares, why does he have a whole song? Can a hearse carrying a corpse use the carpool lane? Asking for a friend. The professor on Gilligan's Island made a radio out of a coconut, so why couldn't he patch up a hole in a boat? Goofy walks on 2 legs. Pluto walks on 4. They're both dogs. What gives? If Wile E. Coyote had all that money for Ask Me gadgets, why didn't he just buy dinner? If corn oil comes from corn and vegetable oil comes from vegetables, should we be worried about baby oil? If electricity comes from electrons, does morality come from morons? Seems likely. Why do Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star and the Alphabet Song have the same tune? And why did you just sing both in your head to check? Why is it called an asteroid when it's in space, but a hemorrhoid when it's in your butt? Why does a dog hate when you blow in his face, but loves sticking his head out the car window? The world may never know. 3 technicians guys go into an interview for a job at the local telephone company. They were all 3 great candidates and very well qualified. The boss brings them into the office and says, "Okay, you 3 look the best on paper. But I gotta know if you have what it takes for the day-to-day work. So I'm gonna give you 1 day to impress me. Set as many telephone poles as you can and report back tomorrow." They all 3 go to work setting poles and return the next day into the boss's office. The boss asks one by one how many they set. The first guy set 13. Wow, 13, that is impressive, the boss tells him happily. The second guy set 9. Well, said the boss, not as good as the first guy, but still it is impressive. He turns to the third guy. How many did you set? The boss asks. 2. The man replies triumphantly, his blonde hair waving in the wind. 2? That's it? The manager was shocked. That's barely any. What were you doing all day? Well, I didn't want to have to be a snitch, but these other guys, they only put theirs halfway in the ground. A blonde lived with 2 blonde roommates. She bought a new car, and on the way home from the dealer got caught in a terrible hailstorm. Her brand new car was dented all over. When she got home, she called the service department to ask what she should do. They offer to send the car to a mechanic, but she'd have to pay for it. She tells them she has absolutely no money. Couldn't they just send someone anyway? The service chief, being a prankster, told her to wait till the car was cool and then blow hard on the tailpipe, which would pop out all the dents. A half hour later, her roomies saw her on her knees behind the car, blowing as hard as she could. They asked what the heck she was doing, and she told them, adding in a perplexed tone, "But it's not working." "You dummy," one of her blonde roommates said. "You have to roll up the windows first." A beautiful young model boarded a plane to New York with a ticket for the economy section. She looked at the seats in economy and then looked into the forward cabin at the luxurious first-class seats. Seeing that the first-class seats appeared to be much larger and more comfortable, she moved forward to the last empty seat in first class. The flight attendant checked her ticket and told the woman that her seat was in economy. The blonde replied, "I'm a famous model, and I've never had this problem before. I'm going to sit here all the way until we get to New York." Flustered, the flight attendant went to the cockpit and informed the captain of the problem. The captain went back and told the woman that her assigned seat was in economy. Again, the blonde replied, "I'm a famous model. I'm sitting here all the way to New York." The captain didn't want to cause a commotion, and so returned to the cockpit to discuss the blonde problem with the co-pilot. The co-pilot said that he used to date a model like her, and that he could take care of the problem. He then went back and briefly whispered something in the blonde's ear. She immediately got up and said, "Okay, thank you." She then hugged the co-pilot and rushed back to her seat in the economy section. The pilot and flight attendant, who were watching with rapt attention, asked the co-pilot what he had said to the woman. He replied, "I just told her that the first-class seats aren't going to New York." 2 bowling teams, one of all blondes and one of all brunettes, charter a double-decker bus for a weekend bowling tournament in London. The brunette team rides in the bottom of the bus. The blonde team rides on the top level. The brunette team down below is living it up, having a great time, when one of them realizes she doesn't hear anything from the blondes upstairs. She decides to go up and investigate. When the brunette reaches the top, she finds all the blondes frozen in fear, staring straight ahead at the road and clutching the seats in front of them with white knuckles. She says, "What the heck's going on up here? We're having a grand time downstairs." One of the blondes looks up and says, "Yeah, but you've got a driver." A young blonde woman goes to an office for a job interview. The interviewer decides to start with the basics. "So, miss, can you tell us your age, please?" he asks. The blonde counts carefully on her fingers for about 3 seconds before replying, 25. The interviewer tries another straightforward one to break the ice. "And can you tell us your height, please?" The young lady stands up and produces a measuring tape from her handbag. She then traps one end under her foot and extends the tape to the top of her head. She checks the measurement and announces, 5'3". This isn't looking good, so the interviewer goes for the real basics. "And hey, just to confirm for our records, your name, please?" The blonde bobs her head from side to side for about 20 seconds, mouthing something silently to herself before replying, "Stephanie." The interviewer is completely baffled at this stage, so he asks, Just out of curiosity, miss. We can understand you're counting on your fingers to work out your age, and the measuring tape for your height is obvious. But what were you doing when we asked you your name? Oh, that, replies the blonde. That's just me running through happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. One day, while on patrol, a police officer pulled over a car for speeding. He went up to the car and asked the driver to roll down her window. The first thing he noticed, besides the nice red sports car, was how hot the driver was. Blue eyes, blonde, the works. I've pulled you over for speeding, ma'am. Could I see your driver's license? What's a license? Replied the blonde, instantly giving away the fact that she was as dumb as a stump. It's usually in your wallet, replied the officer. After fumbling for a few minutes, the driver managed to find it. Now may I see your registration? Asked the cop. Registration? What's that? Asked the blonde. It's usually in your glove compartment, said the cop impatiently. After some more fumbling, she found the registration. I'll be back in a minute, said the cop and walked back to his car. The officer called into the dispatch to run a check on the woman's license and registration. After a few moments, the dispatcher came back. Is this woman driving a red sports car? Yes, replied the officer. Is she a drop-dead gorgeous blonde? Asked the dispatcher. Yes, replied the cop. Here's what you do, said the dispatcher. Give her the stuff back and drop your pants. What? I can't do that. It's inappropriate, exclaimed the cop. Trust me, just do it, said the dispatcher. A smile in his voice, so the cop goes back to the car, gives back the license and registration, and drops his pants just as the dispatcher said. The blonde looks down and sighs, "Oh no, not another breathalyzer." I invited my boss and her husband over for dinner, and while we were eating, she asked my son, little Johnny, what he learned about in school that day. I said that we usually play a 4 clues game where we have to guess, and she thought that would be fun. So Johnny gave his first clue. It's kind of round and covered with hair. That didn't narrow it down much, so he went to his second clue. It can be full of liquid that you can access through a crack. Nobody had an idea yet, though knowing Johnny, I was starting to get anxious. He gave his third clue. When Mommy and Daddy were unpacking and changing from a day at the beach, I peeked into their room and saw that Mommy had one and Daddy didn't. Still no guesses from anyone, but I was starting to panic. Johnny gave his final clue. It contains the letters N, U, C, and T. My wife saved my career when she quickly blurted out, "Coconut!" A man goes into a cafe and asks for breakfast done my way. He says, "Can I get a full cooked breakfast, but I need it cooked my way? Can I have bacon that's so burnt that it's blackened like pieces of chiseled anthracite? Can I have sausages that are so rubbery that you could bounce them off the ground and they would hit the roof? Can I have all the shell broken up through my scrambled eggs so it tastes like an egg praline? Can I have the tomatoes, mushrooms, and beans so overcooked and watery that they just taste like greasy, congealed slime?" The man behind the counter says, "Don't be ridiculous. You expect me to have the time to do all of that for you?" And the guy says, "You seem to find the time yesterday." A sign in a restaurant window reads, "If you order it and we don't have it, you instantly win $1 million." A man walking by notices the sign and walks into the restaurant, sitting down with a smirk. The waiter asks for his order, and the man requests white rhinoceros stew. Surprisingly, the waiter returns with a steaming bowl of exactly that. The man, taken aback, eats the expensive meal and leaves angrily after paying. The next day, he returns with the same smirk and orders bullet ants stuffed with dolphin meat. The waiter promptly brings him his requested dish. Once again, the man, surprised, eats his meal, pays, and leaves in frustration. On the third day, he sits down and asks for a lactating mermaid breast sandwich. After a few minutes, the waiter returns with 2 large duffel bags containing $1 million. Ecstatic, the man exclaims, "I knew it! You don't have mermaid breast." The waiter politely responds, "We actually do, sir. We just ran out of bread." A married couple wakes up one morning, and while still lying in bed, the wife turns to her husband and says, "Maybe you shouldn't go to work today." "What do you mean? Why shouldn't I go to work today?" replied the confused husband. "I think you've been working too hard, so maybe instead of going to the office, you should take a few days off, pack a suitcase, and go stay with a friend for a few days away from home." The husband thought for a moment and decided to jump at the suggestion before it disappeared. Within moments, he was up, dressed, and started packing clothes into a bag. Just out of curiosity, the husband asked while getting ready, "How did you come to the conclusion that I've been working so hard that I need a break?" "You were dreaming about your work all night." The wife answered, "Really? How do you know I was having dreams about work?" "Because every 2 minutes you were shouting your secretary's name." An elderly woman visited a store that sold jade and requested 7 kilograms of potatoes. The owner was delighted to help and started packing the potatoes. However, the woman stopped him and requested that each potato be wrapped individually. The man complied and asked if there was anything else he could help with. The woman then requested 4 kilograms of onions to be wrapped in a similar manner. The shop owner packed the onions and asked if there was anything else. The woman requested 7 kilograms of carrots. "Let me guess," said the owner with a sour face. "You want them wrapped individually?" "Oh, that would be grand," she said. The shop owner fulfilled her request and packed all her items in a bag. The woman then asked, "What are in those crates behind you?" The man flushed red and said, "Madam, these are grapes and they are not for sale." As Josh strolled along the street, he saw his buddy Michael striding along anxiously with lots of bags in his hands. "Hey, Michael, is everything all right? You seem kind of jumpy." Michael set the bags on the ground and said, "Yeah, I was just now at the state-of-the-art supermarket that they launched in the industrial part of the city." "Oh? What's it like there? I heard it's remarkable." "Kind of," Michael replied. Josh was amazed when Michael described the grocery store with enthusiasm, emphasizing the atmosphere of naturalness and genuineness. You could hear cows mooing and smell the barn in the milk section. In the egg aisle, chickens were cackling and the chicken coop was in the air, and it was even better in the vegetable section. You could literally hear the farmers and smell the fields. "Wow, that sounds incredible," Josh exclaimed. "Well, yes, in principle," said Michael with a grimace. "But this is the last time I'm going there to buy toilet paper." On a very windy day, a rabbi was walking along when a strong gust of wind blew his hat off his head. The rabbi ran after the hat, but the wind was too strong. It kept blowing his hat farther and farther away. A non-Jewish young man, seeing what had happened, ran after the hat, caught it, and gave it back to the rabbi. The rabbi was so grateful that he gave the young man $20 and blessed him. The young man was so excited that he decided to go the racetrack, and with the rabbi's blessing, he decided to check the program and place the entire $20 on a horse. After the races, he went home and recounted his very exciting day to his father. "I arrived at the 5th race and looked at the program. I saw this horse named Top Hat was running. The odds on this horse were 100 to 1, but since I received the rabbi's blessing, I bet the entire $20 on Top Hat, and guess what? He won. In the next race, there was a horse named Bowler at 30 to 1, so I bet the entire amount of my winnings on him, and guess what? I won again." "So did you bring the money home?" asked his father. "No," said the son. "I lost it all on the last race. There was a horse named Chateau that was a heavy favorite, so I bet everything on him. And since Chateau means hat in French, I figured he was a sure thing." "You fool," said the father. "Hat in French is chapeau, not Chateau. Sighing to himself, the father then asked, "So who did win the race?" "A real long shot," said the son. "Some Spanish horse named Sombrero." A woman's closet door was making terrible sounds whenever a bus was crossing the street outside, so she called a carpenter to check it out. The carpenter comes to see what's the problem, but sees nothing. Right then, a bus is crossing the street, and a loud creaking sound is heard coming from the closet. He can't believe it. So strange. Says the carpenter to the wife. "How unusual. Perhaps if I sit inside before the next bus comes, I can see what's making such a noise inside." The wife thinks it's a good idea, if sorry for his time. The carpenter goes inside the closet and gets comfortable, looking at the wood. A few minutes later, the husband arrives home. While the wife is in the bathroom, he goes into the bedroom and opens the closet. To his shock, there's a man sitting inside. He throws a look to the bathroom and then slowly turns his face to the carpenter with murder in his eyes. "What the heck are you doing in my house, in my closet?" he growls ominously. Well," the carpenter swallows nervously. "Would you believe me if I told you I'm waiting for the bus?" A large corporation hires a tribe of ex-cannibals. As they accept them, they tell them, "You have full rights as employees, but you're not allowed to eat anybody." Things go well for several weeks, and then the CEO calls the tribe into his office and says, "One of the employees has been missing for several days now." This is awkward to ask, but did you eat them? The chief of the tribe checks with his people and says, "No, sir, we have not eaten anybody. We have left that all behind us." The CEO remains unconvinced, but without evidence, there is nothing he can do. He apologizes for the suspicion and sends them back to work. Once they are away from the other employees, the chief turns to his people and asks, "Okay, which one of you idiots did it?" A tribesman sheepishly puts up his hand and admits, "I ate the cleaning lady." Enraged, the chief slaps the man and yells, "You fool! We've been eating department heads, marketing executives, and efficiency consultants for weeks and nobody noticed. Then you had to go and eat someone they'll miss." A Japanese company and a Swedish company decided to have a row competition as a publicity stunt. Both teams trained long and hard. Competition came and the Japanese won by 1 kilometer. The Swedish company's leadership was shocked. But in this major crisis, the leadership showed its value. They wanted a rematch next year so they could save face. The other company agreed. Right away, the Swedish team started to examine the reason they lost. The company created a special task force. After a lengthy examination for several months, the report was submitted that it appeared the Japanese team had 1 person at the helm, and the rest were rowing. On the Swedish team, 1 person was rowing as the rest were at the helm. After this report, the company decided to hire a consultant to solve the issue. After experts went through the findings of the task force for a few months, the judgment was clear. There were too few people rowing and too many people at the helm. Armed with this knowledge, the Swedish company took swift action, and the result was that there would be 2 steersmen, 2 senior steersmen, a captain, and a rower. In addition, the rower was enrolled in a bonus scheme system to motivate him for better results. So a year went by, and it was time for the rematch. Surprisingly, the Japanese won again, this time by 3 kilometers. The Swedish company management knew exactly what to do. They fired the rower due to poor performance, got large bonuses for all managers for their initiative in trying to solve the issue, and for next year they decided they would try to design a better boat. A stockbroker walks past a kid selling lemonade. "Hey, mister! You want some lemonade?" A little girl calls to him. The stockbroker is just getting out of his brand new BMW in a nice tailored suit. He was about to walk past when he saw double take at the sign that says, "Lemonade $50. "Your sign is wrong, kid. I think you mean 50 cents. The little girl shakes her head. "Nope, $50, mister. I need the money for space camp. The stockbroker paused for a minute because he appreciates a good hustle, but clearly this kid is going about it the wrong way. Look, sweetie, I know you're trying to make money, but you have to charge what people are willing to pay. No one is going to pay that much for a tiny cup of lemonade. Now, what do you think is a fair price? The little girl beams and says, $50, mister. The stockbroker gives a little sigh and shakes his head. Okay, I'm gonna pass. You see? You can't make a profit when no one pay your price. Now, do you have anything else for sale? Homemade brownies, 50 cents. The stockbroker winces in frustration. Okay, look, I studied economics at Harvard and I got my MBA from Wharton, so I'm gonna teach you a little about business. Okay? Now, each of your little cups of lemonade probably costs you about 50 cents, including the margin cost of your stand. He takes out $1. I'll pay you 10 times that much because I want to help you understand about markup. The little girl shakes her head and smiles. No thanks, mister. $50, please. You know what? I give up. Take this $1 and I'm going to buy 2 of your brownies. I know you're losing money on them, and I'm not going to buy a single cup of your overpriced lemonade. I'm trying to be nice and teach you about business, but I guess this is the only way for you to learn a lesson. Okay. The girl takes the $1 and puts 10 brownies on a plate. Just to make the point, the stockbroker decides to eat one of the brownies right in front of her. Suddenly, he begins coughing and gagging uncontrollably. Oh my God! What did you put in these? She grins happily and says, It's my special recipe. Eggs, flour, butter, cocoa, sawdust, and goat pellets. This is horrible. I have to get this taste out of my mouth. The little girl takes out a jar full of $50 bills, cocks her head to the side, and says, through a beaming grin, You want some lemonade? Lorenz's law of mechanical repair. Once your hands become coated with grease or paint, your nose will begin to itch. Anthony's law of the workshop. Any tool, when dropped, will roll to the least accessible corner. Kovac's conundrum. When you dial a wrong number, you never get an engaged tone. Cannon's karmic law. If you tell your boss you were late for work because you had a flat tire, the next morning you will have a flat tire. O'Brien's variation law. If you change cues, the one you have left will start to move faster than the one you are in now. Same goes for car lanes. Bell's theorem. The moment your body is immersed in water. The phone rings. Ruby's principle of close encounters. The probability of meeting someone you know increases when you're with someone you don't want to be seen with. Willoughby's law. When you try to prove to someone that a machine won't work, it will. Zadra's law of biomechanics. The severity of the itch is inversely proportional to the reach. Brida's rule. At any event, the people whose seats are farthest from the aisle arrive last. Owen's law. As soon as you sit down for a hot cup of coffee, someone will want to talk to you until the precise moment your coffee is cold. Agency. Sir, we found 3 candidates as per your requirements. How do you want their placements? Manager. Put about 100 bricks in a closed room. Then send the candidates into the room and close the door. Leave them alone and come back after a few hours and analyze the situation. If they are counting the bricks, put them in accounts department. If they are recounting the bricks, put them in auditing. If they messed up the whole room with the bricks, put them in engineering. If they are arranging the bricks in some strange order, put them in planning. If they are throwing the bricks at each other, put them in operations. If they are sleeping, put them in security. If they broke the bricks into pieces, put them in information technology. If they are sitting idle, put them in human resources. If they say they have tried different combinations, yet not a single brick has been moved, put them in sales. If they have already left for the day, put them in marketing. If they are staring out of the window, put them in strategic planning. And If they are talking to each other and not a single brick has been touched, congratulate them and put them in management. A man goes into a restaurant and is seated. All the waitresses are gorgeous. A particularly beautiful waitress came to his table. "What would you like, sir?" He looks at the menu and then looks at her, then answers, "A quickie." The waitress turns and walks away in disgust. After she regains her composure, she returns and asks again, "What would you like, sir?" Again, the man looks at her and answers, "A quickie, please." This time her anger takes over. She reaches over and slaps him across the face with a resounding smack and storms away. A man sitting at the next table leans over and whispers, I think it's pronounced quiche." A soap factory had a problem. They sometimes shipped empty boxes without the bar inside. This challenged their perceived quality with the buyers and distributors. Understanding how important these relationships were, the CEO of the company assembled his top people. 6 months and $8 million later, they had a fantastic solution. On time, on budget, and high quality. Everyone in the project was pleased. They solved the problem by using a special scale that would sound a bell and flashlights whenever a soap box weighed less than it should. The line would stop, someone would walk over, remove the defective box, and then press another button to restart the line. As a result of the new package monitoring process, no empty boxes were being shipped out of the factory. A while later, the CEO decides to look at the first week report. Since the scales were put in place, no empty boxes had been shipped out of the factory. Each day, about a dozen defective boxes were being removed, which was consistent with the projections. There were almost 0 customer complaints, and they were gaining market share. The CEO felt the $8 million was well spent. However, the number of defective boxes picked up by the scales dropped to 0 after 3 weeks. He filed a bug against it, and after some investigation, the engineers came back saying the report was actually correct. The scales really weren't picking up any defects because all boxes that got to that point in the conveyor belt were good. Puzzled, the CEO traveled down to the factory, viewed the part of the line where the precision scale was installed, and observed just ahead of the new $8 million dollar solution sat a $20 desk fan blowing the empty boxes off the belt and into a bin. He asked the line supervisor what that was about. "Oh, that," the supervisor replied. "Bert, the kid from maintenance, put it there because he was tired of walking over, removing the box, and restarting the line every time the bell rang." A timekeeper at a factory is in charge of blowing the whistle for the lunch break at noon. When it's almost noon, she looks at her watch, and right when it strikes 12 p.m., she blows the whistle. One day, she bumps her watch against something and she fears that it is a little off. Wanting to make sure that she can do her job correctly, she decides to go get her watch set by a professional clockmaker. The woman goes to the shop and has the clockmaker set her watch to the correct time. She tells the clockmaker what she does for a living, and that it is important that her watch keeps correct time. The clockmaker tells her that she needn't worry because he set his watch by the clocks in the back, and that he can be sure that they're on time because he sets them every Sunday when the church bells ring at 6 a.m. The woman leaves the shop satisfied, but starts to ask herself, how does the church know exactly when it is 6 a.m.? So she goes to the church and finds the bell ringer and asks him how does he know when to ring the bells and how does he make sure that he has the correct time. The bell ringer tells her that he rings the bells right when his watch strikes 6 a.m. "I'm sure my watch is accurate." He reassures her, "I check it every day at noon when the factory goes on break." Two Bible salesmen, Rick and Martin, are going on their regular route when the boss rings them. "Guys," he says, "you two are my best. Can you please take my sister's son Andrew with you to try him out?" He's got a bit of a stutter, but he's a smart boy. I promised her I'd give him a shot. The two reluctantly agree and wait for Andrew. Wasted day, grunts Martin sadly. Yep, gotta help the boss though, says Rick patiently. Once Andrew arrives and slowly introduces himself, they are even more dismayed to discover his stutter was quite pronounced. Deciding to make the best of it, they go from door to door with Martin and Rick showing Andrew their sales pitches. After the first couple of hours and a few neighborhoods, they had sold 7 Bibles. At the next neighborhood, Andrew shyly asks, "Did you mind if I take the next one?" The other two exchange embarrassed looks. They both knew how impatient people are. Andrew seemed like a nice boy, and they didn't want his hopes crushed. But there was no help to it. "Well," Rick drawled, "he'll have to learn sooner or later. You take the next one, kid." Andrew asks them to wait for him, and he makes his way to the first few houses. After about 15 minutes, they spot him making his way back. They are initially glad to see he didn't seem crushed or disappointed, then shocked when he brandishes money for 10 Bibles sold. "What in goodness name did you do, kid?" Martin whispers, staring at the money. "I told them that they could buy a Bible, or I would read it to them," says Andrew. A rabbi and a priest meet up after a year not seeing each other. The rabbi goes, "Man, you put on some weight since last time." Priest, "Yeah, I know. It is a new technique I came up with. You go to a restaurant, eat as much as you can. When the bill comes, you tell them you already paid for it." Rabbi, "Sure, but the waiter won't believe you, right?" Priest, "Of course he won't. That's when you tell him how dare he doubt a man of faith. It usually works and you can leave without paying." Rabbi, "Very nice. I'll be trying this." Later that day, the rabbi goes to his favorite kosher restaurant. After eating 5 plates, the waiter comes up to him with the bill. Rabbi, "Oh, I already paid." Waiter, I'm pretty sure you did not, sir." Rabbi, "You know I'm a rabbi. How dare you doubt a man of faith? I told you, I already paid." Waiter, "So sorry, sir. You are right. It must be some misunderstanding. You're good to go." 15 minutes goes by and the rabbi is still at the table. 30 minutes. 45 minutes. 1 hour, and he is still there. The waiter walks up to him. "Sir, why are you still here?" Rabbi, "Well, I'm waiting for the change." A young man dressed walks tall through the doors of the local coffee shop one Sunday morning. He sits lazily and looks the place up and down before raising his hand and summoning a waiter. "I would like your freshest coffee. None of that muddy stuff you probably usually make from yesterday's leftovers." The waiter assured him they make fresh coffee many times per day. "I'll believe it when I taste it," said the young man. "I'm from New York, and I know good coffee. There's very little chance you've got good coffee here, so at least make a new batch for me." And he shoos him away. The waiter goes to the kitchen and comes back with a cup of steamy coffee. The man tastes it and immediately makes a disgusted face. "Just what I thought. That's not fresh. Come on, make me another one." The waiter goes back to the kitchen and indeed takes some time to return. Upon his return, he is holding a steaming and aromatic coffee cup. The waiter gives the gentleman the cup and he takes a sip, before spitting it out immediately. He turns to the waiter and shouts, "This is way worse. This coffee tastes like mud." The waiter, looking surprised, turns to the man and says, "But sir, it's fresh ground." A few decades ago, there is a restaurant that advertised that it will serve you anything you want. But if they can't, then they will gift you $5,000 as an apology. A man passing by sees this message advertised at the entrance and believes this to be total BS, but decides to try it out anyway. He enters and a waiter takes him to a table. The waiter asks, "What would you like to eat today, sir?" Man, "I would like an elephant's ear and a muffin to eat, please." Waiter, "Give us just a moment." The waiter leaves to the kitchen. As a few minutes pass by, the man believes he's going to get an easy $5,000 as he thinks they are taking too long and probably preparing something else. At this moment, the waiter returns. Appearing a little anxious, the waiter asks, "Apologies, sir, but do you mind telling me what kind of elephant you want this ear from?" The man is stunned. He didn't think they'd get to this moment. Man: an Indian elephant is fine. Waiter: "Thank you." The waiter goes back to the kitchen. 1 minute later, the waiter returns again. Waiter: "And which side did you want the ear from?" The man is starting to sweat bullets at this point. Man: left ear, I guess." "Splendid," says the waiter, and leaves to the kitchen yet again. The man is scared as he has no idea how much this ear is going to blast away his wallet. 5 minutes later, the waiter comes back with a platter of food and $5,000 for the man. Waiter: "Here is your order, sir." "Sorry, but we are out of muffins."